Cannonball! Hey, it's your friendly neighborhood potato witch. Welcome to the show. Live by the Sword Tactics, which from here on out I'm just gonna call Live by the Sword because it's way less awkward to say out loud, is the debut game from indie developer Labrador Studios, a team located in York, England. These good folks were kind enough to provide a complimentary copy of this strategy RPG for me to play and review, for which I'm very thankful. So yeah, Live by the Sword is a strategy RPG, a game genre I really enjoy. They advertise it as being an unashamedly old-school tactical RPG, which, awesome. I love it when I find games that basically say, yeah, it was inspired by a bunch of the classics, because not only do I then know what I'm getting into when I play it, but also because I love seeing how older games continue to inspire people to make newer games along the same line. So, Live by the Sword. The premise of the game is pretty simple. A pair of brothers take it upon themselves to prevent new troubles from arising, and adding more ruin to an already ruined land. Definitely dipping into the classics there, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. It may not be the most original premise I've ever seen, but honestly, does it really matter if a story is original so long as it's still decent? Sometimes walking along those well-trodden paths is just good for the soul. This is less of a merry band of adventurers and more of a people who work together in order to save the world situation. I can get behind that. I mentioned that this was a grid-based strategy RPG, very similar to Final Fantasy Tactics. It's actually gotten a little bit of flack for being so similar, but I mean, come on, it's a turn-based SRPG on a grid with a fantasy setting. Of course it's going to be compared to FFT. And while FFT was hardly the first game to employ that sort of system, it was one of the earliest ones that most of us encountered given the PlayStation's popularity and availability, plus the strength of the Final Fantasy brand. When making a game like this, it's hard not to be inspired by Final Fantasy Tactics. But Live by the Sword does take a bit of a different approach to battles. Or rather, to character growth related to battles, in that there aren't any. There's no experience system, no leveling, none of that stuff that's pretty standard for, well, just about every RPG and RPG adjacent sort of game. Characters at the end of the game will have the same stats, same abilities, same everything as when they started. I'm honestly of two minds about this. On one hand, it does eliminate the potential need to grind, and puts the onus on the player to improve their strategies, rather than just boosting their stats and overpowering everything in their way. On the other hand, well, I like doing that. So the fact that the opportunity isn't even there makes me feel nervous in battle, because dang it, now I actually have to be good at the game. Though, on the flip side, sometimes getting good at the game involves recognizing that your strategies won't work unless you get a little bit stronger. So there's that. It's a mixed bag, really. For those who aren't into level grinding and prefer a bit more of a balanced challenge, then this works out great, as that's exactly what Live by the Sword delivers. But if you enjoy taking a break from the story to kill a few monsters or bad guys, gain some extra money, better equipment, etc., then you're not going to find that here. Heck, equipment isn't really a thing either. What you see at the beginning is what you get. Now, as much as I do love a good level grind, the lack of that feature makes one aspect of the game much more approachable. Multiplayer. Yep, Live by the Sword has the option to engage in battles with friends online. I admit I didn't try this option when I played it, mostly because I don't have any friends with the game, but if I did, there's honestly some comfort in knowing that I'd be fighting someone who couldn't just steamroll me by way of stats. We'd have evenly matched teams, and the deciding factor would be which of us has the better tactics and execution. It puts everyone on an even playing field, and frankly, that's pretty cool. Okay, so I've given this game some praise, and now it's time to balance out that praise with some stuff that honestly made playing some parts of the game a bit of a chore. First, and the thing you will notice very quickly when you start to play, is that the game is slow. Enemy AI takes a few seconds to think before each opponent character moves, at which point they move slowly across the playing field, the animations for their attacks get executed slowly, and the same thing for all of the characters in the player's party as well. Well, minus the AI taking a few seconds, of course. Unless you're an AI watching this, in which case I welcome our new AI overlords. Nice to meet ya. But if you're a regular old human like I am, it means waiting impatiently for enemy units to do something so that I can also do something. I felt like a significant chunk of each battle was just sitting and waiting. And maybe that whole the AI is thinking thing is to prep players for possible delays when playing multiplayer. I don't know. But for the single player story campaign, it just got tedious. Now, the AI itself is pretty good, even if it feels like it takes forever to figure out what to do. Rather than, say, just targeting the closest character for attack, they'll go for injured characters or characters that pose the largest threat. Some have ranged attacks that they use pretty effectively. The AI doesn't typically gang up on characters, which admittedly is a bit of a blessing, but it's also not unheard of, at least when I played. So credit where it's due, the enemy AI puts up a pretty good fight, rather than existing just as an obstacle to impede progress or to beat down in order to strengthen my own characters. I mean, it'd have to put up a pretty good fight really, since I can't strengthen my own character. If the enemy side doesn't give it their all, then what's the point, right? The downside to this sort of gameplay loop is that it gives the player no reward for completing a challenge, except to go on and complete another one. You get no money, no opportunity to buy new equipment, no seeing your team grow, none of that. And sure, games don't always need to give you that little dopamine hit every time you do something, but it sure is nice. If you're enjoying the game, then continuing to play might be enough. But if you're looking for incentives to keep playing beyond just continuing to play, then Live by the Sword isn't exactly forthcoming. I can respect the risk that the devs took with this tactic, but it might alienate players who really appreciate the positive feedback they typically get in other games. I did notice that one very common element from typical SRPGs was also entirely absent in Live by the Sword, and that's the idea of back attacks, or side attacks. In most games in the genre, attacking an enemy unit from behind or from the side, or being attacked that way yourself, has benefits. Increased damage, lower chance for the enemy to evade or block, that sort of thing. And it's just entirely absent here. And I will be completely honest about this, that sucks. Back attacks and side attacks are a key tactic that add a great layer of strategy to games in this genre. It feels a bit counter to the idea of teams being evenly matched and what matters more is the player's strategy, because without positioning bonuses like that, it weirdly does become a battle that amounts to, how can I just brute force my way through with what little I have? When attacking from the front is just as effective as attacking from behind, it just feels, well, kind of boring. Though, I guess it isn't entirely true that position doesn't matter. Characters can climb onto elevated areas, which increases their damage output, usually by a single point. That's pretty much it though. So, okay, there's no leveling, no experience, very little in the way from position strategies. So how exactly are you supposed to win battles and advance the story? Live by the Sword has a variety of character classes that the player can use to build a team that suits their needs and playstyle. The stats may never go up, but what those character classes can do really make or break a battle. At the moment, there are 10 character classes to choose from, though a few of those are ones you have to unlock via special conditions, rather than being available right from the get-go. Archers have fantastic range, naturally, whereas brawlers can't move as far or fast, but they can hit harder. For a lot of the early story, you're only going to have a team of 5, but as you progress, you gain access to more character classes that can help you along the way. Each character class has special moves that they can use. Alchemists, for instance, can chuck potions at allies or enemies and cause different effects depending on the potion. Medics, of course, can heal. Each class has 6 abilities, and you select 4 of them to use at the beginning of each battle, depending on what you think you'll need. Given that there's no MP or SP or anything like that, each ability can only really be used once. Your medic used all of their healing abilities already? Too bad, you're not getting another. This is another aspect that I'm a bit divided on, because while I can't deny that it adds something to the strategy of the game, making you really deliberate as to whether or not you should use this or that ability now or save it till later, I also find myself asking, why? Why does the medic only get a few opportunities to heal per battle? Their entire purpose is to keep themselves and their allies healthy, but if you need to heal someone more than a few times and your medic is out of healing abilities, they just become pretty useless on the battlefield, dealing a paltry single point of damage in a regular attack. These elements definitely set Live by the Sword apart from many of its contemporaries, but there were also a few times I wish it had actually been just a little less standout. That's not to say it's a bad game. Far from it. For the most part, I had a pretty good time with it, and I can absolutely see what the devs were going for. Seriously, even with games I love to death, there's always something that just doesn't necessarily hit home with me, and that's fine. I'm not suggesting that these things be changed just because I don't like them. But I bring them up because one way or another, they could sway someone's decision to buy the game. I don't want people to steer clear of Live by the Sword. On the contrary, I would love it if more people bought it. Though that price point is kinda steep, and I think that alone might dissuade people from buying it. There is a short demo available, which is nice, so people can give that a try before they decide whether or not to drop $30 on a game that, as it currently stands, offers about 7 hours of gameplay. Well, the story mode does. But as I mentioned before, there's more than just story mode. There's the multiplayer aspect, which I imagine could keep players entertained for quite a long time. Skirmish mode gives you a quick battle against the AI, but without story progression. Tactician mode presents you with very specific win parameters, and you have to figure out how to accomplish them. Like a puzzle, but with people beating each other up. And one of the roadmap goals for Live by the Sword is a mode that allows players to build their own battleground, so to speak, letting them design a battle map that can be shared with other players. So even if the story mode is pretty short, there is more to this game than just the story, and there's definitely potential for many hours of gameplay to be had for those who enjoy SRPGs. Ah yes, road mapping. That one word says that the game isn't exactly complete. It's got enough to make it appealing to potential players, and a fair bit more has been planned for future updates like additional character classes, new abilities and traits, most of which will apply to the game's adventure mode, which is a sort of travel around the country and build it as you see fit, but there's also permadeath so watch out mode. Kind of like a roguelike in some ways. There, you do earn money from battles, but it's used to pay for healing and to hire new characters to replace the ones who inevitably died in battle. Taking it back to an earlier point in the video where I talked about the gameplay loop, this also feels a little bit flat. Even the reward you get for your victory mostly just exists for you to keep on playing the exact same way you had before. Which, I want to stress, isn't necessarily a bad thing. I've seen talk occasionally about how leveling isn't the most effective way to keep players in the game, and how if a game is really that good, playing it is its own reward. Definitely a moment of your mileage may vary, and I can absolutely understand that standpoint, even if in a personal sense I much prefer a leveling system. Like I said earlier, I am very happy to level grind in games, and I find that satisfying all on its own. But that's just me. Anyway, the story mode almost seems to be the hook to draw players in and give them something to do, while the other modes are being developed more fully. But that does mean that the game isn't 100% finished, and updates will keep coming and changing what's available for players to do. So on one hand, plenty of reasons to come back to the game every so often to see what might have been added. On the other hand, it makes reviewing it rather difficult, as 3 months down the road, anything I say here might be completely invalidated by new updates. Anything anyone says in a review might get invalidated. That's the risk with reviewing roadmapped or early access games. So much can change that it can be hard to find things to say. I can be entirely objective and talk about which character classes are available and how battles will work, but maybe this time next year the game will look and play and feel entirely different. I know this review sounds kinda flip-floppy. I keep saying that, oh, this thing is good, but also there were problems with it, and the same for that thing, and the other thing. The problem for me is that I can see how this is the foundation for a very solid game, with lots of reasons that people will play it and enjoy it, that it changes up the standard formula in ways that create rather unique challenges, and there's the potential for hours and hours of gameplay, but some of those aspects didn't land well for me personally. And I can also see how what didn't land well with me might also not land well with others, creating a potential for negativity to creep into a space that honestly really doesn't deserve it. It's a good game. I can acknowledge that even if it didn't really work for me. I'm not saying it needs to abandon what it's done and what it seeks to do in the future. I'm just saying that for me, I might go back to it every now and again to see what might have changed, but on the whole, the aspects that didn't work for me make me doubt I'll have as much fun playing it as I might otherwise had those elements not been present. Subjective versus objective, I guess. Though, objectively, I really do think those battles need to be sped up a fair bit. I think that's the only non-subjective complaint I really have. That battle speed is irritatingly slow, and I think that's the sort of thing that would annoy anybody. So, even if I don't really feel that the game was for me, I do encourage you to check it out. There's a free demo on Steam so that people can give it a try and see if it's for them before dropping a bunch of money on it, and especially if you're a strategy RPG fan who's looking for a familiar setup with some unfamiliar tweaks to the formula, I think you might well enjoy Live by the Sword. Give it a go and see what you think, and don't forget to let me know in the comments if you agree with my assessment, or if the game turned out to be exactly what you were looking for. I'm always curious to know what other people think of games I cover here. As always, friends, stay safe and happy gaming.